Wow, we got a good crew tonight.
Yeah.
Look at this.
The adults have arrived.
Yeah.
Thanks
Hardly.
everyone for showing up. This is great. This one is recorded, just so you're all aware. It will be given to Ben and David to do wherever they decide to post it, because there were questions about that, and this is not an off the record digital assets chat, so should be good.
I'll stay disciplined then.
Hey, you're editing it. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I've got the pen.
Yeah.
Sorry, I am outside at a coffee shop in Mission Bay. But hopefully
Nature is
you can hear me
healing.
okay. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, let's give it a few minutes for people to come on in. I think kind of the way that I was going to start this off is just kind of like a little bit of like kind of scene set, talk with Dave and Ben a little bit about kind of some of their experiences in actually making the episode, and then like would love to kind of open it up and do this real sort of communal style, like some of your thoughts, reactions to the episode, things you want to dive into more, things you maybe didn't disagree with or you maybe disagree with. So I think that'll work really well for this. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Austin. I work for Solana, but also admin the digital assets channel in the acquired Slack group, and have been in crypto for, I guess, since 2017, which makes me not that long in crypto compared to a lot of people in the industry. But yeah, been around for a little while and been a huge fan of the podcast. So, here we are.
Well, thank you for hosting us. What's the story about Hayden from Uniswap, right? Like he had never like done anything in crypto. He was like, "Oh, I'm so late to the game in 2018," and then his friend, somebody famous, right, was like, "No, just study for 3 months and you'll be a world expert."
It's true. Like, it is astonishingly true even today. You can come from nothing in crypto, and in 3 months you can launch like a market changing decentralized application. It's pretty crazy. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started here. David, my biggest question for this is, in the course of researching this episode and creating it, did you become more of a bull or more of a bear?
Definitely more of a. Well, do you mean on
Ethereum?
Okay, on ETH specifically. I think slightly more of a bull. I was already a bull, and I became slightly more. I had been worrying about scalability coming into doing the research for the episode. If anything, I'm like just as much, if not more, worried about scalability. But I think that getting the historical perspective from like the journey of Ethereum over the past whatever it's been 8 years made me realize that like this has happened before. People have always been worried about this. It's always continued, and thus likely I think it will continue. Scalability issues be damned, regardless. But it also made me more bullish on alternative protocols in addition to Ethereum.
Sure. It's kind of funny because like I was listening to the episode and like, a bunch of I work for Solana. Solana is often considered to be an Ethereum competitor. I would say it's not truly a competitor, but it's something that's trying to take a piece of what's currently done on Ethereum, specifically the execution side, and take it over from Ethereum. But I thought you guys were actually a little hard on Ethereum at a few points in the episode.
How so?
Well, it was interesting because it's like, from being someone who has been like kind of in it for a while, you don't have the same distance as someone who's coming in and doing like a thorough researched explanation of like what's the history and what happened. It was fascinating how much you two focused on almost like the politics of Ethereum, which are like, it's like a very startup thing to do, right? Is like the politics of the founding team drives the first 5 years of a product always, because it's all politics in the early stages of a startup before the adults are hired. But for Ethereum, like as a community member and as someone who was never an Ethereum developer, but like building in and around it, like we never saw that. Like that was kind of like a side of the Ethereum story that actually was pretty new to me. And going through it was like, yeah, you hear about like, okay, the MakerDAO situation, the situations where Vitalik kind of has to like make a decision, but not sort of the day-to-day sort of infighting and people leaving the team and all that sorts of things. So I thought that was really fascinating.
That's super cool. It's so funny too, because I, in doing some of the research, Ben more than me, in the research process talks to other people. I do talk to other people, but I tend to be more the one that I just like read stuff. But the people I did talk to for the research mostly were on the investor side, crypto investor side. And their perspectives were way more harsh on the people side than we painted on the episode. So if anything, I felt like I was kind of pulling punches a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
way more harsh.
That's definitely fair when you talk about people like Kyle from Multicoin, who, he's got some YouTube clips. Let's just say that.
Yeah, and other people too.
Yeah,
it's interesting too, though. You say, it's funny. I hadn't thought about this. The human side of things. I think because of what Acquired is, the human stories are what makes the episodes compelling, right? So like we over-index on that because like that's the compelling part. If it were just the analysis is important too. But I think if it were just 3 hours of analysis, like people would turn off.
Yeah.
So
totally.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear your perspective too.
Yeah, it's definitely fun. And then when you're looking at kind of like the cycles of it, right? The cycles are kind of this like retroactive narrative we've sort of like ascribed onto like the times of Ethereum, right? There was the crypto kitties boom. There was the ICO craze of 2017. There was sort of the big run up, the big crash, this crypto winter, this sort of DeFi summer that kind of came out of it. How much of that was actually like, because like that was not like a narrative that I think you leaned into particularly heavily. Like what was that kind of decision to sort of not go with that sort of like boom and bust cycle narrative for this?
Interesting. It was not a conscious decision at all. I guess you're right. We didn't as much talk about boom and bust as maybe I feel like we did more of that maybe in the Bitcoin episode.
There's less to talk about with Bitcoin too, because it doesn't really do much.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Honest answer is I don't know. I guess the driving principle of this episode, the driving force behind this episode was just the human stories, and maybe that just didn't map as much to the booms and the busts. Although the MakerDAO, like that was so good. I mean, that's one of my favorite stories of all time.
Yeah, and that's like the great part about this too is like the structure that you ran it through. It was like here's the human component of the story, and then here's like the ways that the humans actually like did good and bad things, right? And that was really nice. Is a lot of people don't sort of draw that line between like, it's really easy to look at Ethereum and be like, oh, this is just a bunch of like very code-headed people who are building a very code-headed product. And then so they made a very logical decision that we have to roll back Ethereum. We have to do this MakerDAO transition. We have to not be a place that's like the infallibility of the chain will top the viability of the product. But then all that sort of turmoil in that is like exactly the same kind of turmoil over like who gets to be a founding member. Like there's no presentation and we're about to go on stage, like, we're not all that kind of thing. It really kind of rolls right into that. And so I thought that was super interesting. I'm also pretty sure Ethereum launching at Bitcoin Miami is why you can't talk about a single other currency at Bitcoin Miami now.
So it's like a formal rule now?
It's a formal rule. You cannot mention anything but Bitcoin.
Awesome. I have
is that rule determined by the miners, or who gets to determine that rule?
The conference organizers, I'm sure. Two fun stories, especially before Ben joins. Well, when we release this in some form, we'll let him decide if he wants them cut out or not. One, so about the, Austin, you were saying about humanizing the Ethereum story, and that you would think it's just a bunch of code on the outside or whatever, like, Codehead's when we were first, so I had to lobby Ben to do this episode, as I had to with Bitcoin. And when we were first talking about it, and Ben kind of agreed, he was like, okay, it's important enough, we should do this. But, we'll do it, like, there's not a good story there. Like, it's just, the thing about it, like, Vitalik's story is not that interesting. The story of Ethereum is not that interesting. And this was before I'd done the research. I'm like, yeah, I still think it's important enough we should do it. And lo and behold, I think they're some of the best stories we've told on the whole pod. So it just like really made me double down on our tagline of like, every company has a story. There's a story behind everything, whether you think so or not. That was one. So that's embarrassing to Ben. The embarrassing story for me is I realized it took until right about when we were going to ship the episode, like the day before when we were going through and editing it. In my retirement accounts, I've been holding Grayscale trusts for both Bitcoin and Ethereum and Ether to get exposure in my retirement accounts. I realized I was holding the Grayscale Ethereum Classic Trust, not the core Ethereum Trust.
Oh no!
So I was like, oh crap! And then I actually ran the numbers, and I was like, well, what have I done better by doing so? And not even close. I did 5x better by holding the Classic Trust over the same period of time as if I had held the regular one, the core Ethereum. So I immediately dumped Classic and rebought the core Ethereum, and now I'm down like 20% on that.
Amazing.
Yeah, code is law. I should have held Classic.
I love that. That's so good. Yeah, one of the things that I think it was Gary Tan who said this to me like a year, like maybe 2 years ago, was like, imagine if no one had been able to shut down Napster. Like, imagine what that founding story would have been like nowadays, right? And like all of these things that like got shut down in the early days of the internet would never have gotten shut down if they were crypto projects. They might still have failed, but the failure would have been a market failure. It wouldn't have been an intervention failure, which I think was fascinating, right? And like all these stories too about like YouTube almost getting sued into like oblivion, and then Google sweeping in at the last moment and sort of rescue acquiring it. Like, you don't get to see any of those stories in crypto because the product is kind of unkillable from a legal standpoint. And so I'm just curious how many stories we're missing.
Wouldn't the analogy be kind of be like torrents though? Like, I mean, I feel like torrents are much less prevalent than they were at peak, and they're kind of decentralized in the same way. Like once they're up and running, they're a little bit harder to kill. I'm not impossible, like the same way all internet traffic is like censorable in some way, but.
Yeah, but imagine if you got BitTorrent tokens for seeding a BitTorrent, right?
There were weren't there some protocol things like that where like you got like some higher download bandwidth for uploading more, and
but it was never like, you can never just directly turn it into currency through an AMM, which would have been cool. But
there is now. BitTorrent actually launched their own.
Yes,
they got bought by Tron, so that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, right. So yeah, let's go ahead and open this up. Like, who thoughts, reaction to the episode, like experiences with Ethereum. I'm especially curious on people who either like they held ETH as an investment, but they weren't really particularly caught in on the story, or people who are kind of coming in new. Like, what's your experience now? How do you feel? Someone just
I wasn't
talking.
new along with the episode because I'd been kind of in a rabbit hole of research around Ethereum. It's kind of one of the narratives that I kind of thought, like just as like a side by side, it wasn't leaning into more, was just like I find Vitalik very like interesting as a leader, because like there is a leader, so there's like kind of less of kookiness that kind of flows around, I feel like, in the ETH community that you can't attribute to like ETH in some ways. Like every kook who like does something weird in Bitcoin gets to be like the face of Bitcoin for anyone who wants to make them the face. But the fact that Vitalik's kind of like down to earth, a little bit more humble, a little bit more like, thoughtful, introvert. I mean, maybe it has pluses and minuses. Maybe it'd be better for like ETH as a protocol, like as a meme layer, if he was like, out there with like nonstop laser eye memes and never like, was like never like nuanced and kind of the way he speaks. But it's just like a very interesting contrast, like the way a lot of, I would say, the crypto space as a whole operates, where like, because there's this incentive to be the person at the head, there was like this incentive to be like loud and kind of garish in that way. But he, I'd say to like my personal credit to him, like avoids that. And
yeah, I think one thing I'll add sort of about Vitalik's character, and I was sad that this didn't make it into the episode, is about him like donating all of the SHIB tokens or whatever he was given and then like burning quite a bit. I don't know exactly what he did, but it seems like he pretty much gave all of it away. And I think that's like a huge testament to his character.
I would say worth pointing out that correct me if I'm wrong on this, that was like a relatively high portion of his net worth too, like at least by market cap. It was like way more than his ETH holdings. It's not like, oh, well, he's really wealthy through ETH as well. Like the value of his Shiba Inu was worth, interestingly, like a multiple of his ETH holdings.
Let's quantify value there, right? Like it's not like you could necessarily sell $3 trillion worth of Shiba Inu if you wanted to.
I mean, to the extent that you're going to use value for market, like we talk about market cap for Bitcoin, you also can't sell that much, there are many actors who their mere act of like trying to sell like might have like a crash on the Bitcoin ecosystem as well. So like that, I get that this is like an extreme case of that, but I just think like he did use exchanges to like do this donation, as far as I understand. So it's not totally like a misnomer, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the floating liquidity question is always at the heart of any crypto valuation. Is like, it could be valued at X or Y, but like, what is actually the daily volume? Like, how much could you actually sell if you were trying to sell without tanking the market? There's probably a chart that exists of what the SHIB float was at that point, but
and to be clear, he did tank the market.
Oh yeah.
But he still managed to capture the value, right? Like that's the only way he could have captured the value, was by actually donating those tokens instead of trying to sell or redeem them for anything else. So he was able to capture the full like value at that moment, and have it for himself as a write-off.
Warren Buffett move.
I think one of the interesting parts of as you were going through the story is how a lot of the characters that showed up in the early Ethereum story end up kind of branching out into all of these other coins later. Like you mentioned, Amin Gun Sarir, who was the person who kind of spoke about telling Vitalik to do the hard fork and not do the soft fork. And now he's the founder of Avalanche. And then you've got like Charles Hoskinson, and now he's the founder of Cardano, and then you've got the founder of Polkadot, and you've got all of these characters that were in the early story that have now branched off, and you've got all these other chains that have splintered off from this original core group of people that were in that core story. And I think that was really, really cool to hear that.
That was so fun. I'm curious, what do folks think about Cardano and Polkadot? We probably have some biased people on the call, but that was one area I wish I had more time. We had more time before the episode to dive into that and have like, I basically had no view going into the episode on the viability of either project, just that they existed.
I think my very sort of naive take on it as an outsider is that I actually listened to clips of Hoskinson on the Lex Friedman podcast, and he seems to know his shit, is all I can say. And so it seems viable. It doesn't feel like a fraud outright. That's all I know.
That was one thing I was surprised didn't come up in the book. Like Out of the Ether, the guy who wrote that like describes a lot about Hodgkinson, and like he was kind of trying to convince people that he was Satoshi, and was telling people he was like in the Afghan war, and like was very like kind of full of shit, I guess. Like and that actually colored, reading all that made me think a little bit differently about Cardano and like all the things you kind of read. Like there's a really good hype engine for Cardano, but you don't actually see it like delivering much. Whereas it seems like Polkadot is marching towards something. We don't know yet like how successful it'll be, but it is like moving towards something.
Yeah, it's really interesting because like Polkadot is like such an Ethereum project. Like the entire brain of Polkadot, it's just like it lifted exact like all like everyone who created Ethereum spent the first 4 years of Ethereum like trying to convince us all to be like philosophy majors as opposed to shipping and building products. Like it's so interesting. You go back and you listen and everyone is all like this is the way we should build things. These are the incentive structures people should be. It's like you had to like go through like a philosophy PhD to like get onto the idea of like, oh, Ethereum really can change the world. And like Polkadot's the same way. Like their architecture is really elegant. They're building a very cool system, but like they haven't shipped a thing. And it's really interesting to look at that as a model too. That was the major criticism of Ethereum forever, is like they had all these really heady discussions about like where should Ethereum go, and then 6 years later we still don't have proof of stake, barely, right? But like even with all these other things, like it was so hard to buy Ethereum for the longest time too. Like the sort of it's like the brass tacks, right? Like it's like the opposite story of like DoorDash, right? It's like none of the details, all of the theory. Like let's just keep building in the clouds for a while. And I think Polkadot suffers from that too.
I think it's a really interesting dynamic with blockchain startups versus other technologies, because traditionally with startups you want to just launch and you'll fix the bugs later, and that's the inherent way we look at technology products. And when you look at Cardano, you're like, well, they haven't shipped much, so what's going on? But as everyone can appreciate, like one small bug in your code in a blockchain product is a little bit harder to iron out and have giant problems. So I don't have a strong opinion. Yeah, it's hard to get my head around. How critical should you be of?
I evolved my perspective on that. Hi everyone, by the way, since the episode, which is like in the era before apps could have sandboxes in modern operating systems and like there was process isolation, like the same thing was true in OSs. Like in Mac System 7, like you could load an extension at startup and like that could just, it could wreak havoc on the system because it could reach into any other program's like protected memory. There was no such thing as protected memory. And so we just don't have like the security layers in the blockchain land yet. And everything is basically just at the OS level, or probably more appropriately, just at the kernel level. And so all bugs are really gnarly bugs. And at some point we'll have like a security model that makes sense the way that we evolved with operating systems.
Yeah, I really like that as an idea. Yeah, that like the whole thing with Apple being like, oh, we can't let apps run free, but like we can let any website load on the iPhone, is like a really interesting parallel there about just like security models.
Little dovetail on Polkadot, and full disclosure, I'm just in the process of doing deep diligence on making an investment there. Still haven't got conviction. And I noticed people are saying they haven't shipped anything yet. And that's part of the reason is because they have like a master plan for building out the interoperable blockchains. And a big part of that is having a sandbox actually, which is called Kusama. I could type that in, I'll type that in the chat, where a lot of projects get tested in an unregulated environment before taking it live on Polkadot. And I've been communicating with a lot of DeFi founders who love this approach because they can push the boundaries in an unregulated environment before maybe needing to scale back before pushing something live. So it's a cool project that I'm researching day over day. So
Yeah, Kusama's fascinating because it was intended to be a test net, and then it just kept running. And it also, like, Kusama tokens have real value. Like, there's this whole joke that you can be like an ETH testnet built like quadrillionaire because there's just so much ETH floating around an ETH testnet that, like, it doesn't matter. You can basically, like, if you created a DApp early, you have like $100 billion of Ethereum, but it's all fake money because it's testnet money. Kusama, like, still has value. Like, the coins are publicly traded. You can get them in places, and I would love to know more about that. If anyone knows more about that, or maybe that's a good future episode, like how Kusama went from a sandbox testnet to actually a blockchain with a pretty serious market cap.
Yeah, I think blockchain apps, as opposed to tech startups, always try with the horizontal platform approach first instead of picking a vertical and going deeper. So that always slows down whatever it is they're building, right? Even with like, pick your favorite platform. Because we did an ICO, because we raised a lot of money, that the goal somehow happens to be we're going to go horizontal. So that slows down everything.
Do you think the kind of building in public that a lot of, like, I guess blockchains inherently rely on kind of leads that way as well too? Because, like, you need to have something verifiable that people are going to be running. You know, it's not like you're running proprietary, you're asking miners to run proprietary code or something like that. You're like, oh, we're not going to tell you what's in here. But then as a result, it kind of makes things easier to copy. So if you get, like, details wrong, then people can kind of, I don't know, like, fast run you if they see you just doing like one thing wrong. Like, there's not like really anything protectable there in that same way.
That's like the sushi swap story, right? Where they just lifted Uniswap and just changed some stuff and launched it.
Yeah, added a protocol token, right? Like, that was a big deal to some people. It was interesting. One thing, like, I think, like, I just feel the philosophy of, like, Ethereum is just very interesting. I think in some ways that, I don't know, would be an interesting deep dive at some point, just because, like, even just subtle things like the fact that, like, mining is currently proof of work and will become proof of stake, presumably, like, changes in some ways how democratic the protocol updates are, because you should, in theory, as an owner of ETH, care a lot about, like, what the future of the protocol looks like. But as a miner, you care much more of how profitable mining is. And at least maybe someone would disagree with me on that, but that's kind of like my take on it. And so a lot of times it feels like the miners have a little too much power in deciding what's the future of the protocol, when in theory the owners of the coins are the ones who have the correct incentives to care about the future of the protocol in that way.
Is a half hour in too early to talk about MEV? Should we save that for a little later?
No, I mean, it's a good, that's a great point to talk about MEV, right? But this reminds me of Varys talking to Tyrion of where does power lie? Like, we can't automatically say that miners shouldn't have power. You know what I mean? It's the trilemma of miner, dev, user. So and the goal is to keep the value of the thing high, because that's the only, like, for lack of a better word, currency we have. So, I mean, they are what they are. They have the power that they have.
But mining is an auction system, right? So, like, that doesn't need, like, it doesn't need a protocol decision to, like, create the proper incentives for miners, because you pay them to do what they do. Like, it's literally like they decide whether or not they're willing to do it at the auction price. Like, it's actually interesting to me, like, just thinking philosophically about, like, various different protocols, what they leave to markets and what they don't leave to markets in some ways. Like, because there's a certain, like, free market ethos, I think, to a lot of at least the core like blockchains, but there are still aspects of the protocol that are not, that are inherently, like, you know, cost benefit trade-offs that are not left to, like, market forces in that same way.
Yeah, I guess like, this is a radical approach to, like, make Bitcoin greener. I know this is an Ethereum episode, but just make mining reward zero, or just make mining non-profit. Bitcoin will become greener like that. So yeah, but maybe if people want to take it to MEV, Austin.
I mean, so one of the interesting things, actually, I think Mev is something we should talk about, but like I'm kind of curious to get anyone else who sort of feels like maybe we rolled past where they wanted to talk about in this conversation. If there were kind of other before we get into some of the deeper things, just like feedback or like new ideas you had when listening to the episode or something that changed the way you were thinking about it. But then would love to dive into Mev because that's a fascinating wormhole.
I would love to, hi everyone, hear everyone's thoughts on scalability versus composability issue. I mean, that has come up a few times. I'm not sure, maybe in the episode, but I think in the channel as well. And I responded, I was neutral after the episode, but that's one area that kind of both worries me, but also feel like there's a lot of opportunity there. So just would love to hear people's thoughts.
Yeah, so just to kind of frame this, what we're talking about in terms of composability is the idea that Ethereum transactions are currently composable, which means they execute in order. There's one chain, there's one path. So you can be sure that this transaction is going to execute with full knowledge of the current state of the blockchain before the next transaction executes with current knowledge of the state of the blockchain. If you're dealing with sharded networks, that is a situation where because sharded networks work in parallel, you are now executing without full information of the state of the chain. That is one path that a lot of protocols are going down to bring scalability, because you can parallelize operations. That obviously makes everything much faster. There's pluses and minuses to it. Let me just leave it at that.
When we talk about like performance,
How important? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say like the critiques of Ethereum. One thing that like struck me in the middle of listening to it was how much it reminds me of JavaScript. And like, if you're a developer, you know, you can ask somebody and they're like, JavaScript is a terrible programming language. Like there's great videos you can go watch of just how terrible of a programming language JavaScript is, right? But we're all stuck with it today. And like most startups you talk to are building in JavaScript. And it's like, you can't get rid of it. And the other one was like SMTP, right? Like we still use SMTP with very small modifications of what was written like 20 years ago. And so I think like people underestimate the staying power of like a protocol that enough people have agreed on, or a language that is flexible enough that people use it for a lot of stuff. And so it just really feels like Ethereum might be like that, where there's lots of people that come along and say, it's total shit, you shouldn't use it, you know, it's bad, like you should use this, but then like that just doesn't take off, right? Or there's things like Rust and stuff that are used for very specific purposes, but JavaScript is still the thing everybody's writing.
And that's such a good point. And even more so than JavaScript or SMTP or whatever, like there is $200 billion right now worth of market incentives to keep it as it is. Yeah, like totally the amount of entrenchment feels extreme to me.
Yeah, it's kind of like,
Oh, go ahead.
it was this theory I've kind of been like floating around recently, because I think about these market structure issues like a lot, and like all these coins, which is that like market structure is strangely something that's not really subject to market forces because of network effects. So like if everyone's using like a certain structure, it could be really bad for the way the market is like currently operating, but the cost of switching it, like switching the actual structure itself, is so high because like it's a huge coordination problem. Like, you know, I mean, look at even a while ago, Bitcoin couldn't agree on like protocol changes that like a lot of people thought were good. It'd be even harder to get people to change those things now. But then over time, you'd also expect the design decisions from the beginning point to like be a much poorer fit for like the current state of the world, like over a long time horizon, like imagine like 30, 40 years or whatever. But because the switching costs actually grow over time and don't like shrink over time, then that like entrenches these like, you know, structural issues like more permanently in a strange way.
Yeah, I was going to say, to circle back on the scalability thing, and also kind of to touch on the entrenchment piece, you've got a lot of these coins or these chains that are actually forking Ethereum's EVM and then instantiating their own network on top of it. You know, so you've got like Matic, which is, or Polygon, which is a fork of an EVM. You've got Avalanche's C chain, which is a fork of EVM. You've got Phantom, which is a fork of EVM. You've got XDAI, which is a fork of EVM. So you're seeing this kind of scalability happen where people are cloning the protocol and then they're making tweaks on their own chains. And I think what's probably going to happen is we're going to see, you know, a whole bunch of chains fork out, and then we're probably going to start to see consolidation later once something actually becomes the, you know, the true winner, and they start to re-aggregate all of these, you know, disparate side chains that all run on the same base layer EVM protocol back into each other. And then that's probably where you're going to start to see the consolidation, and you're going to start to see like how you've seen the traditional startup land where all these big companies are getting bought up and all reconsolidating back in. So I think that's probably how scalability is happening right now, where you can write a Solidity contract and deploy it on 10 different chains right now, and it's the same contract. So
I had a question. So early on in the episode, you make a comment that basically there was like a Go implementation and a C++ implementation, and you never really got back to it. I think, like, why was that a good thing? And like, where can I learn more as a software engineer? This is like always fascinating.
I can send you links to the implementations. There's like Parity and Geth. And one of them is basically controls like 90% of transactions, and then the other one's just a smaller implementation. So the Go implementation is the primary implementation that everybody uses. But I can I'll send in the Slack the links to both of the implementations.
Yeah, but why was that a good decision at the time? Like,
so part of the early challenges with Ethereum were coming up with a protocol, because they didn't really specify the protocol for how all the smart contracts interact with each other at the beginning. So because they had two people working in parallel, having to work with each other to determine how to process contracts and how to make things operate together, having two concurrent implementations that were basically written in two different languages but had to solve the same challenge made it a more robust network. Whereas, you know, Bitcoin is pretty much only one implementation, and that's, you know, it's the C++ implementation that's at, you know, github.com/Bitcoin/Bitcoin. So having the multiple implementations just forced a little bit better cohesiveness in terms of different implementations of the core processing client.
Got it. Yeah.
And there are a few more people that are building other versions too. I have a friend who works at Status, and they're making a version of a node as well too. So
yeah, and this whole idea has actually been expanded too. There's two different protocol clients for ETH2 as well. There's Lighthouse and Prism. So they're trying to keep the diversity of the software alive.
Yeah, cool. And then like I had a quick comment. I think in the episode you use like distributed and decentralized systems a bit interchangeably. And as someone who works on centralized but distributed systems, that really irked me.
Super fair criticism.
Yeah, because distributed just means it runs on multiple machines. But you can have centralized systems that do that. Just a comment.
We are pedants, so when someone out pedants us, it's it's like touche.
Love it.
We need to be better.
Yeah, thanks.
So
I have
no, go for it.
Also, ask permission from the moderator to go. I have a question for everyone. So Austin did the. Are you more bullish or bearish on Ether and Ethereum after the episode? I can't do a poll on my iPad here, but how do people feel about the price of ETH right now? Screaming deal or not?
I'll go first. I have a strong opinion. I think it's extremely, extremely, extremely undervalued. And I don't know if Ethereum is going to be the winner, but one of the things that I've been thinking of for the last maybe like 4 or 5 years as I've kind of followed Bitcoin and Ethereum is that a lot of if you look at, like the whole market of what is considered like value or money today in the traditional sense, you've got probably like $8 trillion worth of, $8 trillion worth of value in like like gold, right? Or like sound money, which is the market that Bitcoin's going after. But if you look at the securities market, which is kind of what Ethereum is acting as in terms of digital securities, that's like a 60 or 70, probably even more now because of the expansion of, all this quantitative easing and money that's been pumped in. You're probably looking at like an 80 to $100 trillion market. And so if Ethereum is able to replace all of your stocks and all of these equities and all these securities and have an on-chain version that allows you to kind of replace a lot of these things in traditional finance, or like CeFi is what people say, like centralized finance, you're looking at a market that is just massive. And you talk about, somebody was talking about provenance in the channel about, being able to do digital provenance. All that stuff are processes that are handled by traditional companies and middlemen and brokers. And if you can take all that value and translate it into smart contracts, I mean, there's like a potential $100 trillion industry that Ethereum, or any one of these blockchains right now, I think is viable to be able. It could be Ethereum, it could be Solana, it could be Avalanche, it could be anybody. But we talked about entrenchment earlier. Ethereum really has the furthest lead right now. But Yahoo had the furthest lead until Google came and just wiped it out. So it's like, it can be anything. But I think that this value, there's so much value in this space. It's just about figuring out the primitives and then building on top of those.
I think that the Yahoo analogy is super interesting there, and something I think about a lot is like, because everyone always likes to compare crypto right now to like 90s, early 2000s internet, right? Like, oh, it's still the beginning, still early, lots to be built, etc. So for Ethereum in particular, what is the analogy? Is it Yahoo? Is it AOL? Like one of those companies that was early? Or is it more like the Windows, where it's not even like, in the same realm compared to all these other projects, right? Where it's like the network effects are so entrenched at this point that no one's ever going to disrupt Windows in like a meaningful way. And, I'm sure in the 90s people felt differently about that, but I don't know. It's just kind of like the comparison I would ask myself. And I don't know what the answer is, but it's something I think about. And I'm not a technical person by any means, so I could be very wrong in that analogy.
So,
probably LoudCloud, right?
So three of you voted that ETH is undervalued.
Did somebody say LoudCloud?
Yes.
It's right at the LoudCloud/PL sequel for the programmers in the group. It's at the PL sequel level. So we're going to get to GraphQL in a bit.
This announcement, we'll let a cat out of the bag. Next episode, season 9 premiere, is Andreessen Horowitz. So we will be doing a lot of talking about LoudCloud.
Because David is trying to do every episode on crypto and finding sneaky ways to do that without me realizing it.
Full episode on a $2.2 billion crypto fund, huh?
Yeah, what fraction of their AUM now is in crypto? Like as a fund, it feels like a lot. Like just looking externally, but
well, it depends if you count Coinbase. Coinbase was one of the greatest venture investments of all time that they made. At IPO, their stake was worth $11 billion.
Okay, what? Well, I guess the question is, because like they can actively manage their crypto funds, they can't actively manage their a lot of their traditional venture stuff. And I don't know to the extent they do, but I know that's not private information either. So
wait, pop the stack. Let's go back to where.
Yeah, let's go back. On the Yahoo point, Joe, that was a great point. The interesting thing, if Ethereum does turn out to be Yahoo and not Windows or Google or whatever, the interesting thing about Yahoo, right, is it stayed very valuable for a long period of time, and it got crushed when the tech bubble burst. But then it came back up. It was trading in the, if I remember right, $30-40 billion market cap range for a long time.
Do you remember the Microsoft attempt to acquire Yahoo?
Yeah,
for like $45 a share or something like that. Whatever it was back then.
Way longer than like anyone who was even remotely in tech knew that they were completely irrelevant. But you had plenty of chance to like get out and monetize your value if you were a shareholder. I'd be curious how things like that play out in crypto. Like, I don't know, maybe that's Bitcoin right now. Like, but yeah.
Their media properties were good for a long time, right? Like just as that analogy, it would be like what would be like left over, like that's still really good, even though like their heyday as like the portal kind of like era
And
died.
they
Like
had a 20% stake in Alibaba, which was lots of people were just valuing it based on that.
but that wasn't, I don't think that was being that heavily valued in like 2007 or something, like 2008, when they still have like a lot of market cap.
I think it's a very different dynamic when you're talking about a protocol layer that people are building on top of than Yahoo, which was like a media property and a portal destination, right? Like I think you could find different analogies from old tech stuff that's like still around today and still built on, right? Like whether it's what's keeping the banks running, right? Like the COBOL code running wire transfers, things like that. But going to your point in the chat, Josh, I think like what you were talking about, Joe, like NASDAQ as a company is like a $30 billion company. And like how much is kept on NASDAQ, right? And so like, just like it comes down to like, what can ETH actually, what's the value capture from everything that's going on top of it? Not just that it happens to have trillions and trillions of dollars of value transacted on it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think you see, if you look at most platforms, the platforms are actually relatively not as valuable as the things that move on top of the platform. Like I used to work at BBN Technologies, and they pretty much co-founded the ARPANET, and they went out of business, right? So this company that pretty much invented the internet is like gone. They have the second domain name registered. A lot of the early patents for IP technology are in their hands, but they're gone. And I think there's a difference between, like, I think Ethereum could be that substrate, but you're going to see the real, like, big businesses that build on top of Ethereum are going to be the things that explode. So there's going to be some Amazon of Ethereum and some Google of Ethereum and some Facebook on Ethereum. And I do think that you're right. Those are the things that are actually going to explode. It's not going to be that the protocol layer is capturing all that value. But I do think that the protocol layer today is still undervalued relative to the businesses that we're going to see in the future that will be built on it. But the question is, what are those businesses that are built on this decentralized platform that physically cannot exist in the Web 2 world, right? You need to have something where it's just like money, right? Digital money, the way you send money back and forth. You can't do that in the centralized world the same way you do it in the censorship resistant way in the Web 3 world. So what are the rest of those use cases that are going to spin up? I think that's the question.
Joe, I'm tempted to say like it's not the architecture of distributed applications, decentralized applications, inherently means there's not going to be a bunch of value that accrues to a corporation that writes an application that sits on top of the protocol layer. And this is a Union Square Ventures post from a long time ago talking about fat protocols that crypto basically means that more value gets captured. I'm sure you've read it at the protocol layer than at the application layer. But I think I would have said the same thing about the internet if you had told me in '93 about like HTTP and SMTP, and there's going to be a browser and you can visit any website in the world and websites can be hosted on any server anywhere. I probably would have bet on decentralization there, but actually what has happened is the value capture has centralized to 5 big companies. So I'm trying to reason about why that happened on internet v 1.0 and 2.0, but in Web 3, that's not going to be the case.
It's almost worse than that though, because if the Microsoft DOJ suit hadn't happened, you really were looking at Internet Explorer owning that entire portal, right? That it, like, the computer was an internet appliance and it was going to be a Microsoft appliance, and like AOL would have been a Microsoft product effectively. So it's kind of interesting to look at like, what are the levels of sort of reasons why that didn't happen? On the Web3 side of things, it's kind of funny. One of the things that like we keep like kind of dancing around, like we as like a crypto community, layer 2s are inherently a middleman. Like definitionally, a layer 2 protocol is a middleman in the marketplace. It's a new protocol layer that's standing in between you and Ethereum or you and whatever else. And that doesn't mean they're not adding tremendous value, but like we've had this very, very, very flat economic system in crypto since it began. And there's sort of an assumption that's going to be the forever model. And I don't know if that's a good assumption to make. And I can't really think of a good reason why it's going to change, but just anytime there's like assumptions baked into entire economic, I think that's something worth questioning.
Well, I think also like this kind of weird thing where like there's been this assumption for a long time, and I don't know if it's still the basic assumption that like some, Coinbase is like a way to access, crypto, right? Like, but it's a layer that works for like a typical end consumer. And then like we kind of assume that these models will build up because not everyone wants to deal with their own like private keys and all these other things. And like that exists with like various dynamics of like, how do DeFi products work? It's like, well, I don't want to have to know how they work to like use them. And obviously something is going to exist that's going to put a layer between that and like an end user of like the most, if it's really building value for like billions of people. And presumably those companies are like, if they create a lot of value by enabling consumers to access like that value, then they're gonna have methods to capture a larger fraction of it, either because the protocol enables them to, or they figure out a way to skip the protocol altogether.
I think one of the most interesting projects that is in Ethereum right now that is very valuable, but capturing almost none of it is Uniswap. They built arguably one of the most used protocols in crypto today. Like every single chain that has a DEX is, if you look at their source code, they're literally linking to the Uniswap API, application binary interface, for how to make all the calls. They've copied the contract and deployed it on their own chain. And there's a site that has lists of, a bunch of DEXs, and 80-90% of them are basically Uniswap clones. But the way that they design their system is an egalitarian system, right? So the contract doesn't make money, the liquidity providers make money. And so I think that it's a very interesting system that we're seeing, where you've got these projects that are being built, these crypto primitives, similar to like basic commands in Linux, right? Like ls and print working directory and those types of commands, that you're seeing these primitives being built, but they're actually not capturing value. There's no like Red Hat yet. There's just a bunch of tools that people are building, and there's going to be somebody that's going to basically make Dropbox, right? They're going to take rsync, and they're going to put a nice little wrapper around it, and they're going to make a Dropbox, and they're going to be able to capture value. But I just don't think we've seen that company happen yet.
We're forgetting NBA Top Shot, right? So in the future, like if there's competition, there's going to be people who try to build on Ethereum, hit their limits, and be like, F this, we're going to write our own chain. So that's going to be a big thing, right? On vertical splitting, if the people who built on Ethereum or any other L1 chain decide that we're going to, like our app, we're just going to run it on our own app chain, that's a clear way to split from the value capture, value creation mix of the L1 chain.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, that was definitely a thread that we didn't have time to add into the Ethereum episode, but I think would have been a really good one, which is we talked all about CryptoKitties, we talked all about Dapper Labs. Like, well, actually, they built Flow, and then they built NBA Top Shot on Flow, and we just didn't discuss that at all. Yeah, I'm curious what people think about that.
One thing I'll add kind of in the value thing on that aspect is that I think people are kind of valuing the sort of programmable money aspect, but I don't think that they're correctly valuing the power of the identity aspect, because the identity is on the protocol. And like, I guess I've seen it, like I've invested in both like Okta and Slack. That is extreme, and even Facebook, right? And that part is extremely powerful. Identity, yeah, a defined identity is basically, I'll just kind of say, to be more specific, like I'll just say authentication for now, is who is using sort of the platform. Like authorization is another sort of important thing, but like we'll kind of leave that out for now. So authentication, yeah.
Yeah, this is something you might
Sorry,
not
go ahead.
expect from me. But you know, David, to your question of sort of like they splintered off and they did this other thing, sharding might solve this, right? And the way sharding might solve this is you could see a world where the 64 or whatever number it is now shards of ETH2 become effectively specialized side chains. And that you see, so the program space has to be taken up on a shard for a program to exist on it. And if you want the same program to exist across multiple shards, you need to deploy multiple instances of that program. What that means is you're not going to have price parity between each shard for any sort of asset trade. Or if you want to move $10 million from shard A to B, you're going to have to wait till the sync up things occur on this. But that's kind of a downside of sharding. An advantage of sharding could be that it means you get an NFT shard and you get a place where maybe the economics of shard 37 make something like CryptoKickers is a Solana company building a Solana, CryptoKitties, something that's viable in a world where another shard maybe still has really high or comparatively really high transaction fees, because that's where Lido is, that's where Uniswap is, that's where like the hardcore DeFi primitives are living. So it's possible that we see natural differentiation by shard the same way you see certain types of applications better suited to a GCP deployment versus an AWS deployment.
When you say live in a shard, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so the way sharding works on a very basic level is it's parallel copies of a blockchain. Mm-hmm. So what that means is that when you Ben and David did a really good job of describing this, right? When you deploy code to Ethereum, you're deploying a program address as an account. And so when an input is given to that, it executes a program. You can't execute programs cross-shard in real time. Mm. So that program code needs to be accessible within each shard on any sharded protocol in order for it to be callable without like a delay from the sync up. Which on Ethereum like 2 is every 20 minutes.
This is just like the web. Like you cannot make cross-origin requests for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah. Or it's like trying to share data between two different data centers in AWS. Like there's all sorts of things that as soon as you move outside of the ASN are totally broken and are just incredibly expensive to do.
Yep.
On the identity bit, oh, sorry, go ahead. No, on the identity bit, like what is the appetite to pull out MetaMask and Infura outside of consensus? Like if you want to talk disinvestment or demerger, that's the thing that's gonna, if consensus becomes too big or Ethereum becomes too big, somebody somewhere is gonna say, hey, divest Infura, divest MetaMask. That's gonna be where the dislocation might come from.
Yeah, I mean, they own a lot of things. We're starting to see more and more wallets actually compete with them, which is cool. Phantom, which started off on Solana, they've announced that they're going to build. They're bringing Phantom over to Ethereum as well. So you're going to see a lot of. I think you're going to see a lot more competition in the ETH2 space for wallets and new ways of interacting with them too. Especially if figuring out sharding is going to be a whole new thing for wallets.
Yeah, I'm actually curious on that because I've been thinking about it. What are the differentiating features for a wallet? I mean, I guess being compatible with sharding is a good one, or being compatible across different protocols. Are there any UI differentiating features?
Taylor Moynihan of MyCrypto had this long thread like 2 days ago because of VIP 1559 of what decisions a client has to make. So there's all these little finagly things. And how do I show gas price? How do I show, just the UI of progressively giving the user extra information based on what their state is. It is just a whole like a can of stuff. And there's this, there used to be this thing called, what was that, Balance, I think, by Rick. I don't know who his last name is, but yeah. So yeah. Sorry, Rich Barton. Yeah. So there's attempts to do wallets and attempts to do all kinds of asset management applications in the wallet. So there's like all sorts of up and down integration that wallet players can do.
Yeah, there are lots of little technical challenges because, you know, fundamentally you're having somebody create something that they're never supposed to lose and they're supposed to have full custody over, and you have to make that apparent without scaring them off, and also make sure that they understand what they're supposed to share and what they're not supposed to share. And then you also have to kind of visualize all of the assets and everything that they're tracking. And, you know, there's certain decentralized applications now that have state in their contract that the wallet doesn't even know how to read, right? Or there's certain tokens that the wallet doesn't even know how to have access to. So I'm using some protocols where the only way that I can see what's actually happening with my project is if I log into the website for that project, which then outputs all the information. And so you've got all these very interesting projects that are out right now, and lots of interesting wallets. And I would say the wallet on Solana is actually really, really well done in terms of how it integrates all of the NFTs and all the tokens and everything in a nice way for you to navigate through everything. But for the most part, a lot of these wallets are very bare bones. I think somebody said it earlier, you know, you've got a lot of engineers that are just making engineering tools, and it's not very accessible to, you know, to a person who just wants to look and see what NFTs they have in their wallet, you know.
I think the kind of sneaky way that wallets and now exchanges too are going to make a lot of money is through staking, right? Because if you imagine that you have a lot of people using your wallet to hold a lot of a currency, you can incentivize them to stake with you versus some other pool, and then you keep your 1%. Like, I don't know that people have looked at that for things like Coinbase or Kraken. Like, how much are they making by shaving 1% off the ETH2 I have like staked?
That's such a good point. Coinbase must be making so much money from that.
Well, and look at, I mean, even just before getting to like how much money are they making, it's worth thinking about like how much of ETH2 do they control by being a platform that's enabling early staking. Like, does anyone know what the percentage of Coinbase owner custody is of ETH2?
When you talk about infrastructure under the control of Coinbase, it's over 45%.
So invest in ETH or invest in Coinbase, or they're the same thing?
I mean, right now you can't do anything on ETH. So like, I hate to say, does it matter? But like, does it matter, right? The real metrics are like after the conversion happens, right? Like, ETH right now is the most decentralized protocol from a holdings perspective, but not from a mining perspective. We'll see what happens with ETH2. But yeah, right now, if you take all the companies that are using Bison Trails, which is owned by Coinbase, plus Coinbase, it's over 45%.
To Ben's point, it might be like beneficial ownership, right? Even though on the chain it might say I'm staked via Coinbase, that there's going to be some derivative contract that says this person of that stake is mine, so I'm the beneficial owner, so I get the power.
Yeah, this is a great time to talk
miners
about
still
MEV.
might revolt though. Yeah, miners still might revolt on the proof of stake move. So
yeah, I mean, this is a really good time to start talking about MEV as well.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so MEV is a really interesting concept. It started popping up about a year ago, and it really hit like maximum inflection point maybe 3 months ago. But MEV stands for miner extractable value. The idea behind MEV is delightfully evil, I guess is what I would say. Ethereum and most consensus protocols are based on the assumption that a miner will take a transaction that has the highest fee associated with it. That is a faulty assumption. The miner will accept transactions that net it the most possible revenue. And in many cases, that is not from transaction fees. So Ethereum has this thing called a mempool. The mempool is the whole slush pool of transactions that are basically weighted to be accepted by various miners. Those transactions are not encrypted, they're open. So if you are running a modern system, You can scan those transactions. You can see what they are. You can see what the trades are for them. And then if you control the miner that's responsible for minting the next block in the chain, you can basically do the same thing that happens on Robinhood. You can buy order flow. You can trade against the transactions that not only you know are incoming, but you are literally selecting them and writing them into the chain. And so you are, front running has always been a problem on Ethereum just by scanning the mempool and then paying more money to jump to the front of the line. But with Mev, you can basically do high frequency micro trading on every single block if you control enough of the network to be able to do that. Now, in any given block, if you only have one miner, the chances of your miner being the miner that has the right to build that block is fairly low. However, if you're a mining pool and you've started deploying Mev software across your entire mining pool operation and you control even 2% of the network, that means that 2% of the blocks you will be able to extract value on. And the Mev estimates are actually pretty huge right now in terms of what's actually extractable. So
is this just a DEX issue, or is it just an actual because obviously DEX are derivatively priced trades. They're not pure price trades like a traditional exchange, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't matter what order you cleared the trades on NASDAQ because the trades all took place with the price, right?
But if your trade moves the price.
Well, yes, but assuming that a trade is actually a match on the order book. So the order book has already been modified, but it just hasn't been cleared, right? Because you have both sides have to be matched to clear a trade, like there's a buyer and a seller at a single price or whatever. So yes, you could talk about it on the processing side of the orders, that could be an issue, but it's never an issue on the clearing side of the orders. But since a lot of DEXs are derivatively priced based on where the market is when the trade clears, that seems like a much bigger issue. But that seems like maybe a DEX issue, which obviously miners could exploit, but not really inherently a miner issue in that same way.
I mean, any settled trade that involves a swap is vulnerable to this, right? So,
well, only if you can you can, because the mempool is public, right? In that sense, so anyone could trade on the information in the mempool. So it's only to the extent that the sequencing of those trades matters, and that can, if they were really trades that took place in NASDAQ technology, right, and they were just being cleared on Ethereum, those trades already all would already have prices, so you couldn't. There'd be no benefit to doing it in a different order because the price is already determined. But when the prices are not determined, then that's not public information.
Yeah, if you're doing the pricing off chain, then the ability to exploit here is much smaller.
Or even if it's just even non-derivative pricing, right? Because just the order, it's how it has it. When you say move the price by doing a trade, you mean it's changed the order book fundamentally, right? You bought, and now there are fewer offers on the order book or at the previous available price or whatever.
Yeah, and
so we're actually talking about sequencing incoming orders when we're talking about this from an exchange perspective.
Yeah, this is also partially true because there's no order books on Ethereum. It's just AMMs.
Well, because I have a friend who who worked at Fluidity doing AirSwap or whatever.
Yes,
AirSwap actually had a real order book, so that's not an issue as far as I understand.
It's a general thing, right? Think of liquidations on loans, right? Let's say who gets the liquidation fee on a loan. If I see on the
You muted.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So if I see on the mempool that X contract is getting liquidated and this person's getting money, I could then front run that transaction and say, I'll give you X plus delta fee and I pocket the change. So there's all sorts of ordering. So it is a sequencing thing, right? It's not a price thing. It is a sequencing thing. But just based on that sequence, there's all sorts of shenanigans you can play. And advanced stuff, you can reorg blocks and things. So sequencing transactions is very powerful.
Yeah, I think fundamentally the MEV issue is a problem with blockchains that have mempools. So any blockchain with a mempool where the miner gets to select the order of transactions, and it's something that's transparent that they get to pick, you're going to have this MEV thing. So this could happen on Bitcoin, this can happen on Ethereum Classic, this can happen on any chain where there is an instant finality and you have to pick, and the miner gets to pick transactions.
Now, to be clear, this is obviously a hypothetical issue. Is it like a real issue that's happening?
A huge
Oh
issue.
yeah,
Oh, this is definitely
people
real.
are
Yeah.
people are suggesting that this is going to kill Ethereum. Like I'm in a couple of Slacks and people are losing their mind every day saying, "Oh, Ethereum is
this
done."
worth under proof of stake or proof of work? Feels like proof of work. It's potentially worse, but like I don't. Maybe that's just naive or whatever.
No,
It has
it's
nothing to
like
do
same
with the
thing, yeah.
work. Yeah, it's the same thing. It doesn't. It has to do
Well,
with
But
having a
time to clear,
mempool.
like time to clear has to matter, right? Like the mempool gets bigger, the fact that like we're not instantly clearing all transactions and there's delays, like is what makes this possible. If transactions cleared in real, like close to real time when they were submitted, then the potential for this would be smaller, right? Like
It depends how good the software scanning is. I mean, yeah, definitely. Definitionally, if you have more orders, you're going to have more room. But again, if what we're talking about is like a high frequency blockchain, right? If you have something like Solana where you have potentially 50,000 transactions per block, there's still a lot of ability there to extract value. One of the interesting things about all of this is like there's always been like the point of acceptance of a transaction has always been I guess you call it an attack vector, but it's always been like the point, just like in Robinhood, right? Like if someone's selling your order flow, they're selling your pricing, they're trading against you, but that's on the intake side of things. What we're really talking about here is not like is MetaMask routing your order in such a way that they're able to make additional transaction fees off of. That's just like traditional arbitrage. This is like a more fundamental attack on it. And unless you're timestamping each transaction as it's accepted, and you're ordering transactions based on some sort of time, as opposed to ordering transactions based off of some other system, you're going to run into this on a proof of stake or proof of work.
That doesn't actually solve the problem because timestamps only exist to a single like node. Right, like
it depends. It depends on the system.
Well,
So
you have to like a centralized timestamper to like have a universal timestamping issue, but then it would like that would like centralize the value of like the timestamper themselves or whatever. That'd be like its whole own. Whoever controlled the timestamping would have the same.
Yeah, you'd need to do decentralized timestamping basically. That then becomes vulnerable to a 33% attack, but every proof of stake network is vulnerable to a 33% attack. So at least there you're bringing your fault tolerance in line with other network parameters. The issue with MEV is like there's no minimum threshold for MEV, right? It's the risk is just as high whether it's one. Well, the extractable value is as high as one miner or if it's every miner. It just depends on how widespread the issue is.
Yeah, there was an interesting tweet that was posted earlier today, and it was basically saying if you took out a loan on Ethereum and you closed your loan, and then a couple of minutes after you closed your loan, the price of ETH drops, and you're like, okay, well, I closed my loan before the price dropped. A miner could then rewind time and sandwich your request, and then basically liquidate your loan so that instead of you paying it, you basically got all of your money liquidated. And so you can do like these sandwich attacks on the chain that can have adverse negative effects on individual users of the chain. And if people can figure out how to game these things, it's going to be a very negative experience for anybody who's using the chain, because you're going to say, well, I don't want to transact there because people are going to mess around with the transactions and reorder what I think is happening as I'm clicking buttons in the UI or whatever.
Yeah, and I should say, like, I am not an expert on this at all. Like, there are people who've actually like been building this code who I should try and find and see if we can have someone come in and give a talk. I think that'd be a really cool talk. But yeah, we're still in the early days of this. I linked the original paper, which is from April 2019. It took a while for this stuff to get operationalized here, but we're at that point now where it's widespread enough that like many miners are rolling out modified code to specifically support MEV extraction.
Yeah, I guess the philosophy is if this is possible, let's just all do it. And everybody doing it all together will basically make it not bad again, something like that.
So I'm just trying to think of like, what is there a way to like solve this with incentives? Like, is this a problem where like the fees aren't high enough on an instantaneous level? If the fees were higher, then it would be better to like process them in order.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that, because like the hottest take that I read on this was Mev has just proved that gas fees have never been high enough on Ethereum, which is like, sounds like a trolly take, but like it's true.
Or
Like
at least for
at the end of the
transactions that are sensitive to this. Not
Yeah.
every transaction is potentially sensitive to this. Like, but
Right.
you,
It's crazy that every transaction on Ethereum, whether it is a trade of $5 or $50 million, has had the same fee associated with it. And if you have a $50 million transaction, like, okay, like maybe you can pay $1,000 for MEV proofing it or something along those lines. And then like, I'm sure a bunch of us trade on Robinhood, and like, we know our order flow is being bought. We just don't care.
like are fees, I mean, this is a protocol layer I haven't actually looked into. Are fees on Ethereum not auction based? Like you don't set the fees in your transaction the way you do on Bitcoin?
You do, but no one's reading your transaction and saying, I won't accept it based on the value. So like I could send $50 million with a really low gas fee. It might take 10 blocks to clear, whatever, but it's not like it's not like I don't know, like an AUM model or something where it's like a flat percentage fee based on your transactions value.
No, that makes sense. I'm just thinking like more like, so like in theory, like you could do it on a per transaction, like the more susceptible you are to like this MEV extraction, I guess you just have to pay higher to get cleared faster. The same way you might want to get cleared faster in general and make sure you're part of the next block, but you know what, it's also interesting, like just thinking through these auction models, none of these use like Dutch auctions, right? For like auction models for pricing to be part of the chain. It's kind of crazy.
The problem is also if you're doing a $50 million transaction and you're saying, I'm going to pay $1,000 in gas, front running your $50 million transaction is probably worth a lot more than $1,000.
Exactly.
This is the problem, right?
It
It depends what you're doing.
Fees on equities exchanges are generally like there's a mix of like models with per share and per dollar value fees. So it's not that dissimilar in that way.
Yeah. I mean, this is part of why like we could see a rise of OTC trading, right? Off, like exactly what you're talking about, where a price is set off chain and then something else occurs on chain as a transaction, but that it's structured in such a way that the MEV potential is much lower.
Yeah, I mean, you could have just off-chain like negotiating of that issue particularly, right? And then like just immediately the transaction goes on chain once it's priced, kind of like the way you don't generally clear a stock trade before it has a price on it.
Yeah. But again, all this stuff is like, none of it's insurmountable, but it's all going to dramatically change basically what like the amount of trust you have in the Ethereum system or any system that uses a mempool in this way. I think the calls for it, this as being like the killer for Ethereum are overrated, but it does mean that like at the end of the day, like, so if you're in like, sure, everyone on this call knows this, right? But if you're a big bank, you buy a server from NYSE, it's the exact same model as everyone else. The Ethernet cables are the exact same length to the switches because they're making sure everyone's operating on a level playing field from a hardware standpoint. And then what you're just doing is code optimization to see if you can make things faster and faster. But
you actually don't buy the servers. You can put your own servers there. You just
changed it.
This has been true forever. Like you've always bought rack space in the servers, but they hook up the connection.
Right, the Ethernet code, like it's all the same length of cable.
Yes, the links are rented out at hefty fees to make sure they're all equal and all
interesting. I thought they
were
the same servers. I didn't realize that they didn't have standard.
You can totally ship your own hardware in there. Like it's just like any other data center. You rent a rack.
Yeah, but like at the end of the day, like that is a censorship resistance model that they've implemented, right? That like no one's going to be able to get physically closer access to the center than anyone else. And that is what we've assumed Ethereum was for a long time, a generally speaking equal playing field where this sort of thing wasn't going on.
What's interesting is that co-location actually solves the problem of unequal access. Like everyone like co-location always gets this like negative vibe, but like only by being co-located can you guarantee equal access to participants.
I think the trade-off with that is censorship resistance, right? Because if it's co-located, then there's one person that can turn off the whole thing.
There's still competition, but yes, yeah.
I was impressed, Austin, that you let the timestamp question just go by. That was,
You know, sometimes you just got to sit back.
One thing I'm curious about, circling way back to the valuation, we're talking a bit of some of the bear case for Ethereum. So a few people voted that it was overvalued. I'm curious what someone who feels really strongly about a bear case or that is currently overvalued, what that might look like. If anyone's left it to that.
Yeah, I can go. Instead of a value, overvalue, undervalue, there's a mispricing of it. Right? I don't know what the value is. The other guy doesn't know what the value is. I'm just saying it's mispriced relative to the short-term shock that we can see, right? If Binance goes down, if a couple more exchanges add KYC, like KYC AML stuff, and transaction volume goes down, what does that do to demand? And what does that therefore do to price? Does it really matter in the long run? Probably not. But in the short run, quote a short work, maybe. I don't know, right? So it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's short-term regulatory shocks. There's short-term like systematic shocks where DAI is now what 60% USDC. So what happens to that decentralized aspect of it? So there's all sorts of like shorter term stuff where in the next 6 to 8 months, sorry, next to 2 to 3 quarters, we can see like a lower price. But again, this is very short term. Long term, what happens? I have no clue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm camp overvalued in the short term. I still hold Ethereum. I'm not selling it, and that's because I think in the long term, the potential upside is very high. I have trouble looking at Ethereum and thinking it's in 10 times better shape than it was this time last year, and that's the 200 to 2,000 jump. And then you look at the 4,000 price we was at recently, and it's like, okay, what are at the end of the day, like, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a lot of speculative work. I do also think that we are in a place where Ethereum 2 is too big to fail. Like from a market standpoint, it's too important for it to fail. But what does failure look like? I think is really like a question. Like how low could Ethereum go before we consider Ethereum failed? I think there's a huge amount left to fall. And in that context, in the current state of things, with the amount of uncertainty of Ethereum 2, and also just of these layer 2 scaling solutions coming up, which could pull a huge amount of transaction value away from Ethereum, it's hard to see in the next year that the current price makes sense, in my view.
Should have kept everything in Ethereum Classic.
I'm Doge to the moon, guys.
Charles Hoskinson would love you for keeping it in the Ethereum Classic.
Oh man, that would be a great LP episode.
For sure.